Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
As you might imagine, Democratic members of Congress representing the D.C. metropolitan region are none too pleased with plans to relocate some USDA agencies out of the area. The idea stems from the first Trump administration, when Suhas Subramanyam was still serving in the Virginia Senate. He's now a member of Congress, and he spoke with Federal News Network's Eric White about his thoughts on the proposed moves.
Well, what's the same is that the previous attempt to move different USDA offices was a complete disaster, and this will be a disaster as well. It will undermine the ability to serve farmers, to do food safety and food nutrition, and be able to administer programs like SNAP that the USDA currently does very well. I think what's different is that this is even more wide scale. It's even broader. And they're moving it to many different parts of the country, not just one. So the last one, when they tried to move it to Missouri, and that area was a complete disaster. This time will be the same, but now they're moving it to multiple places. And not only is it bad for our region, obviously we have a lot of federal workers here, but many of them will not follow those agencies. Maybe that's part of the point, to undercut them. But, just like with the last move, they had trouble finding people to administer these programs that had the experience needed. And then the offices had trouble communicating with each other and working in an effective way. So this is bad for all Americans, not just our region.
Has the White House responded with giving you any specific reason? I know that you have your ideas on what the real reason is, but was there an official response that was even granted for, or was it just chalked under the idea of efficiency again?
Yeah, the White House hasn't responded to any of my inquiries. I have a bill with Senator Van Hollen from Maryland to try to basically ask the question, is this worth the move to taxpayers? Forget about, one region versus another. Does this make sense to do? And the answer in this case, and in most all cases, is no, because there's a reason why a lot of the agencies are in the DMV area is because we have a ready workforce. We have agencies who work together on a number of different projects, and it makes sense to have at least a headquarters in different parts of this region. So by doing this, you're basically undercutting the work, and maybe that's part of the point, is to continue to damage government and basically ward off federal workers in order to say government doesn't work and cut it even more. But it's going to be bad for all Americans, especially Americans that benefit from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's mission, which is to serve farmers, make sure our food is safe, and make sure that hungry kids get the food that they need.
Yeah, broadening this out a little bit and picking your brain as pretty much a lifelong public servant at this point. You've worked in almost every facet of state and local and national government now, and at a very young age. What can you say about the sort of chilling effect that moves like this continue to have? We hear it on our programming all the time from folks that we speak to, but as a representative of Virginia 10th District, what are you hearing from constituents and even former colleagues possibly?
Yeah, I'll say this. I've actually spent more time in the private sector in my career. And the fact is, a business would never move its headquarters unless there's an economic reason to do so or functional reason to do so. And so if the USDA were a business, there's no way that they would move. They're wasting taxpayer dollars. There's no reason when it comes to efficiency or still fulfilling the mission for them to move. And so I would say that whether it's in the private sector or public sector, you justify your moves. And in this case, this is not justified. And federal workers generally here, we're losing a lot of really good people. A lot of people are laid off, but many others have just taken the deferred resignation plan because they have the experience. They can get employed in the private sector. They don't have Doge breathing down their neck, hovering and telling them what a bad job they're doing, even though they're saving taxpayers millions and sometimes billions of dollars.
Yeah, how hard is it going to be to gain back the unique expertise that you're used to seeing? Like I said, people get jobs in the private sector from gaining that experience. It's likely not in exactly what they were doing for the USDA, whether you're an economist for ERS or a mathematician for NEFA. What can be done in the meantime to maintain that talent pipeline within the DMV area and all over?
Yeah, the last time before Congress, I was in the public sector full time was in the Obama White House. I was a technology advisor, but a lot of what I did was actually government efficiency, and I worked with what is now DOGE, the U.S. Digital Service. And I'll say this: we spent a lot of time trying to attract and retain really good people from the private sector. The people who are delivering pizzas in 5 minutes to people, we wanted them to deliver Social Security checks with the same efficiency. And that was work that started in the Bush administration, then Obama, and then continued in Trump 1, and then continued in Biden. And now Trump 2 is ignoring all the good things the first Trump administration did to actually address government efficiency because they have this sort of notion of, we need to fire all the federal workers and replace them with Trump loyalists. This is not about government efficiency. This is actually about loyalty tests and about loyalty to the president and undermining the very services that these agencies do very well.
Yeah, and with people, turning to their representatives in Congress, you had just mentioned the bill that you had submitted with Senator Van Hollen. Are there any other initiatives that you are currently taking on in the hopes of aiding federal employees affected by these policies?
This can be a bipartisan issue. I know there are a lot of Republicans who agree that this is bad, even for government efficiency, to spend a lot of money to move an agency the way that they're moving it. And so I'm going to try to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to stop some of these moves. I'm going to do things for our community as well in our region. I'm having a job fair on August 15th, George Mason and Manassas, and we're going to try to pair employers with some of the really highly qualified federal workers who are getting laid off or leaving the federal workforce. And we're going to try to see what we can do for our economy. In the end, some of these cuts, it's going to be hard to recover from. And what I want to do is make sure that we're diversifying our economy more, because we have a lot of federal workforce right now, and they're under attack, and they deserve better.
Congressman Suhas Subramanyam represents Virginia's 10th District, and he's speaking there with Federal News Network's Eric White. You can find the full interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive.
What makes a great leader in government? Christine Harada joins WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to reflect on her journey from aerospace engineering to the White House. In this episode, she shares lessons on public-private collaboration, leading with purpose, and why service, not power, should guide leadership.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today, I'm joined by Christine Harada, former Senior Advisor at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Harada, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You spent portions of your career working in both the public and the private sector. And from your experience, what makes leadership in the federal sector different than the private sector?
At the highest level, leadership in the public sector is very fundamentally at its core mission-driven. Right? The work is in the service of the public good, and the goals and the programs are frequently long-term, they're systemic, and they're incredibly complex. And success, isn't necessarily measured by quarterly earnings. We don't have that kind of drumbeat, but certainly more by the lasting impact that we have on Americans' lives. What's also unique about public sector is, in my view, the profound sense of history that you feel. And I think certainly I was very aware about the work that I was doing and how it builds on the efforts of those who came before me, and that future generations of leaders also depend on the decisions that were being made today. And that, for me, certainly provided a greater weight of responsibility.
That's a wonderful answer. And I was in the private sector for much of my career, and now WEPA is a nonprofit, and I really relate to what you said about being mission-driven rather than profit-driven. You've got a long-term view, and always at the core of it is serving others.
Yes.
Is there a moment that stands out to you from early in your career that influenced your leadership style later on?
I started out my career as an aerospace engineer, building satellites and airplanes. And when I first entered the workforce, my organization at the time had 120 people. We were a large company, 120 people, 4 women, and I was the only woman of color. I was also the youngest throughout the entire organization. And so, I remember having an experience when I was doing some engineering work. We had a design review, and I had seen some issues with the flight software that I pointed out. At the time, they're like, maybe it's not really that big of a concern. I was like, but in my heart, I knew that the issue was real and stayed with it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, that topic came up again and we addressed it. Turns out my concern did indeed prove to be valid. And so it's just one of those experiences that really sank into me around ensuring that I am listening to everybody, period, end of story, within the organization, really thinking through about how do we take into consideration opinions from all different spectra. As a third generation Japanese American, right, I was raised to be humble, keep your head down and work hard, etc. But at times, leadership also requires you to speak up, do so politely, with courage, etc. Even though you may be the only voice in your room, but certainly trust your voice. It also really helped shape my belief around diversity. DEI programs right now are viewed in a negative light. We're all mosaics, and they become better because you have those different experiences. And that's really stayed with me throughout the entirety of my career.
The diversity issue is a really big one coming from the insurance industry. That's an industry which is working on that. It's really a diversity of viewpoint and perspective and experiences that does influence your business. And more diverse employee bases absolutely helps. Was there a time in your federal career, perhaps when you were at OMB, that you faced what you consider a real challenge? And how did you overcome it?
One moment that really stands out in particular was when I was serving as the Federal Chief Sustainability Officer during the Obama administration. We had set, like many administrations, had set some really ambitious goals, very, very, very ambitious goals around how do we think about making the federal government's operations much more sustainable. But the challenge wasn't so much about the scale or the technical capacity of the organization. A lot of it was really centered around the funding. We overcame this largely by being very strategic, helping out with blocking and tackling with the variety of legal issues or legal questions that might have come up, like how do we address this? Certainly in the federal government, you're more often leading through influence as opposed to pure form authority, and that you really need to listen deeply, communicate clearly with folks, building out those coalitions and engaging with your stakeholders. And I know many folks in government speak like that, but that is the truth.
As someone who's spent time in both the federal and the private sectors, what makes the relationship between the two sectors important?
Certainly, it's an absolutely essential partnership, and I would add on to that like nonprofits or philanthropic organizations. As I mentioned before, I'm Japanese American, and in Japan there's a symbol for thunder, which looks like 3 arrows pointing around each other in a circular pattern, kind of to represent the swirl, if you will, of clouds. And that's kind of how I view the relationship between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. The government frequently sets the vision, the policy, the direction, but of course it's the private sector that brings the capital, the innovation, the skill set, the capabilities, et cetera, to be able to execute. Partnering with that, of course, are the nonprofits who may be supporting the surrounding society. Public-private collaboration is not just about contracts or compliance, but it's also about figuring out what's your shared purpose. That's when real transformation can and does actually happen.
In life insurance, there's a concept, lifetime value, where bringing a new insured in costs a lot more money than the amount of premium. And so when you talk to commercial carriers, it's a similar kind of thing. You need to bring them into the concept that they're going to be with us 20 years, and after 5 years, you can ride through that. But it's a concept that isn't easy for commercial businesses to understand. That's a partnership too. Very, very similar. What advice would you give to somebody aspiring to become a leader in government?
There are 3 things, right? So firstly, around leadership in government, you want to make sure that you're leading with purpose. You want to stay grounded in your values, and don't underestimate the power of relationships. Remember why you entered public service in the first place, and that'll help carry you through some of the inevitable challenges that you're going to face. Making sure that you are also investing in relationships. In government, you rarely have full control, and I think this is, in my view, more important in government than perhaps in the private sector. You are frequently leading through influence. You are collaborating with very different parties who frequently have very different agendas than you do. And so building that trust, investing in building that trust and planting those seeds earlier and along the way in your career I think is absolutely critical. And certainly last but not least, I would say, don't feel that you have to have it all figured out on day one. Absolutely stay open to the unexpected, say yes to the opportunities that stretch you, and know that you can lead from wherever you are. It's not just about position or hierarchy, it's about the impact that you can have.
What wonderful advice, especially in today's world, which is a little topsy-turvy. Who is one person, someone you know personally, or perhaps someone well-known, that's impacted your leadership style?
The leaders that particularly stand out for me are Colin Powell, a woman named Carla Harris, who was a managing director in investment banking, and then last but not least would be my father. Starting with perhaps the more famous one, Colin Powell. I read his biography, loved his perspectives and the rules of leadership that have been particularly influential for me, right? So get mad, then get over it, share the credit, perpetual optimism, a force multiplier, things of that nature. And hearing his story was certainly very inspirational for me. And so I certainly very much look up to him as a role model. The second person that I mentioned is a woman named Carla Harris. She's an African-American woman, became a managing director at an investment bank in the 80s, at a time when there were not that many women of color in investment banking in New York. And so she's published a book called Her Pearls of Wisdom. It's one of her trademarks. She always wore a pearl necklace, and she has Pearls of Wisdom around how can you be authentic and build relationships to be successful in super challenging environments. And she had a lot of guidance on the importance of finding sponsors and mentors. And certainly last but not least, my father is really my why for I do a lot of the work that I do in the public sector. He started out life like many other, immigrant kids in poverty. He was a strawberry farm laborer. Japanese Americans at the time were not allowed to own the land, so we worked the land. He grew up in that kind of environment. And I just think it's absolutely neat that someone who came really he was dirt poor, to say it, and his daughter ended up working in the White House twice. It's quite the American dream, and I would very much like to have that opportunity available for other people as well.
Well, wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Christine, thank you very much for your time today and all of these learnings. It's really good, impactful. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Until next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.